Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know the famous Norwegian explorer, Roald Amundsen, tricked his four-man crew by telling them they were going to the North Pole, when he secretly planned to take them on a race to the South Pole? Climb aboard the Fram, a ship built in 1892 for polar exploration and unimagined discovery.
Today, we're heading into one of history's most compelling and I think consequential head-to-head competitions. We're talking about the legendary race to be the first human being at the South Pole.
Yeah, we've gone through a ton of sources for this. Journals, historical accounts, modern analysis, and it all centers on this incredible rivalry.
It's a tale of two polar giants, the highly calculated Norwegian Roald Amundsen.
And the tenacious British naval officer, Robert Falcon Scott.
And this wasn't just, for bragging rights.
Not at all. This was the final sprint in a global, century-long contest for geographical dominance. By about 1909, the South Pole was all that was left. It was the last great geographical challenge.
The stakes were just immense.
Huge, driven by scientific ambition and, of course, intense national pride.
And the outcome is what makes this story resonate, even a century later. Amundsen and his small team, they achieve the goal on December 14th, 1911, and crucially, they get home safely.
Right, and Scott's party arrives 5 weeks later, only to find they've been beaten.
And then they meet a devastating fate, perishing on that return journey north.
To really understand how a mere 5-week gap becomes the difference between, historic triumph and this unimaginable tragedy, you have to look past the personalities.
And focus on the logistics.
Exactly. That success was born from a pivotal and very secret strategic shift by Amundsen.
Okay, so let's rewind to 1909. Before the Antarctic, the world's focus was really fixed on the Arctic. What was happening up north that made Amundsen suddenly look south?
Well, the North Pole had become mired in controversy. You had these two American explorers, Frederick Cook and Robert Peary, who both claimed to have reached it in 1909.
It created a media frenzy, I imagine.
A huge one. But the sources are pretty clear their claims were, and still are, highly disputed. The achievement was sort of tainted by all this uncertainty.
So Amundsen saw an opening.
He saw the opening. He saw this chaotic situation and realized that claiming the South Pole was now the undisputed goal, the only one that mattered. He was ready to pivot his entire career on that one insight.
And this is where the secrecy comes in, which is just fascinating. He was already preparing for a totally different mission.
Right, an Arctic exploration. He had funding, public support, the whole 9 yards for that.
So when he sets off in June 1910, he leads everyone to believe he's heading north. His crew, his backers, the public. He was attempting something called an Arctic drift.
Yes, the Arctic drift was a classic scientific strategy for the era. The original plan was to deliberately freeze his ship, the Fram, into the ice pack.
And just float with the current.
Exactly. Let the natural currents of the Arctic Ocean carry the ship and crew across the North Pole Basin. It was a long-term, slow, scientific observation project.
So switching from that measured approach to a competitive sprint thousands of miles in the other direction, that's a radical move.
It's radical, and it meant he needed maximum operational security.
And he got it. The sources confirm he didn't reveal the true destination, Antarctica, until they were literally underway.
At their last port of call in the Atlantic, Madeira. He gathers the crew and tells them. Then he sends one telegram to Scott, who's already on his way south.
Just a heads up.
Barely. It just said, I'm going south.
Wow. That's a declaration of war disguised as a simple update.
It absolutely is. And crucially, he had the perfect vessel for his new goal, the Fram. Built in 1892, this famous Norwegian ship was designed specifically to survive being squeezed by polar ice. It was a tank.
So he had the right tool for the job, even if his methods were controversial.
To say the least.
Okay, so let's unpack the core difference here. Secrecy got him to the starting line, but it was preparation that delivered the victory. If the key difference was 5 weeks and, survival, Amundsen must have made some critical logistical choices that Scott didn't.
It all came down to a fundamental difference in polar philosophy, really. It was born from Amundsen's cultural tradition. His team relied on deep Norwegian expertise.
Yeah, what does that mean in practice?
It means mastery of skis for rapid personal transit and, most importantly, the efficient use of sled dogs to pull their massive loads.
A combination that gave them speed.
Speed, maneuverability, and a reliability that Scott's more experimental technology just could not match.
Right. So how did Scott, with the full backing of the British Empire, planned to move his supplies? What was his strategy?
Scott was leaning on a mixture of things. He used three main methods. Man-hauling, so the men pulling the sleds themselves.
Which sounds exhausting.
Unbelievably so. Then there was mechanical transport motor sledges and, tragically, Siberian ponies.
And how did that work out?
Terribly. The sources show the motor sledges broke down almost immediately. They just seized up in the extreme cold.
I feel it.
And the ponies, while they're robust animals, they sank into the deep snow, they couldn't handle the crevasses, and they quickly succumbed to the intense Antarctic temperatures.
So when they died,
the men were forced to rely on pure man-hauling, a slow, exhausting, and ultimately fatal technique when your supplies are already running low.
So Amundsen's advantage wasn't just having dogs. It was having the right kind of power, something perfectly adapted for that environment.
Absolutely. The journey officially began for both teams in October 1911. They had to find a usable route up to this massive polar plateau.
And that plateau is no joke. It's described as, what, a vast, featureless expanse.
Featureless, white, and at an elevation of over 9,000 feet. And what's critical is that the entire ice sheet is slowly shifting, it's moving.
So even finding your own supply depots on the way back would be a nightmare.
A navigational nightmare. Without constant celestial readings and precise measurements, those vital survival caches would just be lost in the moving ice.
So Amundsen's speed wasn't just about winning. It was about laying down those supply depots and getting back before the harshest winter weather set in.
Yes. And speaking of logistics, there's one detail that really defines Amundsen's approach. It's pretty brutal.
The use of the dogs themselves.
The use of the dogs as more than just transport. This is where the pragmatic difference is clearest. He used his dog teams not just for pulling, but as a self-transporting food source. Meaning once certain dogs were too weak or their loads were lightened, they were killed and used to feed the remaining dogs and the men.
Wow.
It's brutal, but it guaranteed fresh meat, and it maximized the efficiency of the transport system until the very end.
Whereas Scott?
Scott treated his animals more sentimentally, which, hampered his speed and burdened his men with carrying extra feed for them. Amundsen's approach was a cold, hard, logistical equation. It was focused solely on survival and success.
And in all this, they weren't just fast. They were pioneers.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the geographical achievements that came out of this.
Well, because Scott was taking a known, though difficult, route, Amundsen had to find his own path. This led to two major geographical firsts. Most crucially, his team discovered the Axel Heiberg Glacier.
Which was their on-ramp to the plateau.
Exactly. It provided a vital navigable ascent route. They basically solved a major topographical riddle just to get onto the racetrack.
Incredible.
And they also achieved the first successful exploration of King Edward VII Land, which is that large, ice-covered peninsula in the northwestern part of Antarctica. They were mapping and winning at the same time.
So now we get to the moment of triumph. Amundsen and his men, they reached the South Pole on December 14th in 1911. They raised the Norwegian flag.
A historic moment.
But the sources also highlight this moment of, I guess, surprising chivalry. He leaves a tent, supplies.
And a letter. A detailed letter addressed to the King of Norway, but with a note asking Scott to deliver it.
He's effectively appointing his rival as the messenger of his own victory.
It's an incredible gesture, and one that proved tragically poignant. Because Scott and his party, they finally reached the pole 5 weeks later, on January 17th, 1912.
Only to find the Norwegian flag and Amundsen's tent already there.
They had lost, and that delay meant they were now fighting the extreme cold and the advancing Antarctic autumn on their return.
Exhausted, suffering from scurvy.
And facing brutal conditions. Scott and his last companions perished within just 11 miles of a critical supply depot. Logistics determined their destiny.
So the fallout back home was complex. Amundsen's success was immediately and profoundly overshadowed by this national tragedy in Britain.
Completely. Scott was quickly mythologized as a heroic martyr who died honorably for science and empire.
And that led to criticism of Amundsen, right?
A lot of it. That initial wave of grief led to people accusing him of being opportunistic, of undermining the spirit of exploration by keeping his plans secret from everyone.
But what's the view now? How do polar historians today see it, now that the emotion has settled?
Well, what's fascinating is the major historical shift. Recent historians have moved past the drama of the secrecy. They now recognize that Amundsen's planning was a masterclass in risk mitigation and, cultural adaptation.
It's all the things we've been talking about, the dogs, the skis, the equipment.
Exactly. His preparation was simply superior. The focus has really shifted to recognizing the brilliance of his execution.
And the lasting legacy acknowledges both men, which I think is the most profound part of this story.
It is. The permanent research station at the geographic South Pole today is called the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station.
A joint name. For the point that cost one man everything and brought the other enduring fame.
It perfectly captures that the story is inseparable. Amundsen showed the world how to do it safely. He provided a blueprint for modern polar travel. But that achievement is forever connected to the immense cost paid by his competitor.
So what does this all mean for us, this deep dive into the 1911 race? It really feels like a profound study in the difference between ambition and preparation.
It really is. Amundsen's success was a triumph of pragmatic logistics over, you might say, national romance. When you look at the suffering, the dedication, the sacrifice, it makes you reflect on the powerful nature of ambition.
Scott sought glory and relied on untested methods.
And Amundsen sought survival and relied on proven expertise.
So thinking about the monumental risks taken by both of them, risks that Scott paid for with his life, we're sort of left to ponder how we evaluate the highest goals in our own lives. You know, when we set our sights on a massive, difficult challenge, how do we weigh that pursuit of knowledge or achievement against the potential for devastating loss? What kind of preparation has to go along with that ambition for the whole thing to truly be, well worth the risk?
A great question.
Something for you to think about the next time you embark on your own deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the home school for faith and family.